Hi, welcome to the world of Your Utopia by Bora Chung, translated by me, Anton Her. As you may recall, Bora Chung is the author of Cursed Bunny, of which my translation was shortlisted for the International Booker Prize and also a finalist for the National Book Award. I thought I would make a video to do a kind of like a behind the scenes for every story that is in this book, what it felt like translating it, and what each story is, I think, is about. To begin with, Bora is very, very reluctant to interpret her own stories. She always says to me, "Oh, Anton, like, whatever you're reading is, whatever you feel is the meaning behind the story. That is probably what it means." She's also said in interviews about how my translations seem to read more into her stories than she herself is sometimes aware of. But I also think it's because when you're a translator, you do sometimes scrutinize the text a lot closer than a writer necessarily would. And because I have my own novel coming out this summer called Toward Eternity, it's coming out in July 2024. I kind of have an inkling as to like when you're writing a book and even when you're editing it, you don't want to look at it too closely, and you are kind of a step removed from your own work. But as a translator, you can't do that. You have to be absolutely like this when it comes to the text. So Your Utopia, the Korean edition of this book, actually is titled To Meet Her, and the title story is To Meet Her, which is the third story, I believe, in the Korean. But I changed the order of the stories. Again, this is something that I did for Cursed Bunny as well, where I changed the order of the stories, because sometimes I feel like I just like the stories to flow in a certain way. And I don't feel like I have to follow the Korean editor. I mean, the Korean editor is not the author, so I don't see why I have to follow their direction. I just felt like the stories might flow in this order better for Anglophone audiences, because I feel like in the Anglosphere, you want there to be a really big hook in the beginning, and then you want kind of like the more emotionally heavy stuff to come at the end. And To Meet Her, of course, is like a very, very important story, a very emotionally heavy story. We'll get into that in a bit. The first story is the Center for Immortality Research. And this is actually based on, from what I understand, based on Bora's actual experience being a graduate student at a certain literature department here in Seoul. And the things that kind of like happen in the story happen to her. For a lot of the stories, I do imagine that the main character is kind of very much like Bora, this one especially, but also they're like the old lady in the final story, To Meet Her. I feel like, wow, this is Bora, if she lives to be like 120 or however old she is in the story. I do not remember anymore. This person is basically Bora. Well, this is Bora young. So we start out as Bora as like this young graduate student, and then we end the book as Bora as like this old activist, old lady. And so I think I really do prefer my order of the stories as they appear in Your Utopia. For this particular short story, it was very important for me to capture the kind of like very long-winded, hilarious aspect of the way that the character talks. Because the character kind of like says an entire sentence and it's, a whole paragraph. And I didn't want to chop that up. I wanted to keep like the lengths of these sentences, and initial edits tended to kind of like want to break it up a bit, but I was like, oh no, you can't do that. These have to be very long sentences and very rambling sentences, because that's just the way that she talks. She's very breathless. Um, you can kind of Bora kind of talks like that sometimes when she is excited. But who doesn't? I do. We all do. So it's very cute. It's very adorable. The second story of the book is The End of the Voyage. So this story was it's about like a virus that infects people in the future, and then basically people turn into cannibals. It's like a cannibalism inducing virus. Now, we're kind of like on the fence as to whether to call them zombies, because classical zombies are not articulate. They don't really speak. They're not coherent. They only eat brains, as far as I know. But the virus in this story induces people to eat, the whole body, except for the bones, I guess. And so I feel like it's a misnomer to call them zombies. But I'm not an expert. I really like this story. I think there's something very funny about zombies. I don't know. Zombies are hilarious. They're just so ridiculous and so scary, but also really hilarious and very camp. And I hope that we really brought out the camp of the story in the translation and the editing of that one. A very ordinary marriage. So Bora asked me in this Q&A that we did with Scribe, who is Your Utopia's Australian publisher, what would happen if my husband turned out to be, an alien? And my answer was, well, I don't really care because he's really handsome, and I only care if my husband wasn't, not so much as him being an alien. All stories about marriage are really just fun to read and fun to translate. I don't know why. I feel like when you're young, you want to read stories about, two young people falling in love, and then the marriage comes at the end. But the more I grow older, really since like my 20s, the more I was interested in what happens like after you get married, like during the marriage, what happens. To me, that's really, really an interesting, fascinating kind of like, that's what I kind of like want to know more about. Like, I feel like at some point I was like, oh, I think I know enough about falling in love and whatever, and I can do that. I can do the Jane Austen thing. What I really want to know is what happens with the marriage. And I think this story is ultimately kind of like taking this idea to its extreme where what if the person you married is not the person you thought they were? The fourth story is Maria Gratia Plena. I hope I pronounced that right. I probably did not. So that story is about memory and how we recreate memory, and how fiction, like it's about like the boundary between fiction and memory. It's a very Kyung story in that sense. But every time we remember a memory, we're kind of like rewriting it a little bit, and we introduce new things into the memory. And it's basically, it's like any other narrative. You reconstitute a story, and every time you reconstitute that story, it changes a little bit. And it's really moving to see how this character chooses to change her story, because she inserts someone who is very dear to her into her memories. This someone who really didn't exist at the time of the memory. You have to read the story to see what I mean. The most complicated part about translating this story was the fact that there are a lot of tense shifts and that are not consistent within the Korean, and tense shifts are much more subtle in Korean. So what I believe Bora is showing through tense shifts is that, we don't know, we're not that cognizant of how time moves and how time affects our memories and how time affects our storytelling. And so we think something is in the past tense, but it's really in the present tense. We think something is gone from the present and only in the past, but it's actually in the present still. And so her tense shifts were kind of like, to me, I read it as a commentary on how memory and the present moment are really entwined, and it's very difficult to kind of make that very clear line of demarcation between the two, to very devastating effect, because this is a very, very devastating story for me. Of course, Bora herself would be like, oh no, I didn't intend any of that. You're just making up whatever you want, Anton. And to some extent, she would be right. The next story is the title story of the collection, which is Your Utopia. And indeed, this is one of the characters that is in Your Utopia, the story. It's about this smart truck that has a medical service robot riding in the back seat, and they're in a constant search for power, like literal, not, power, political power, but like, electrical power, because all of the humans have abandoned this planet for reasons that are not super clear. But you can imagine what they are. And through their little road trip moment, you can see like all the devastation that the humans left behind on this planet, and how these two robots, they are trying to protect each other and help each other and try to survive. And to me, it really shows you how humanity isn't something that is like born inside of you. It's something that someone really has to give you. And it's so important for us to give humanity to each other. Otherwise, we're just going to like treat each other as animals or as machines. The title of the Korean book is actually To Meet Her, but I really did not like it as a title. I wanted a different title for the book, and we threw around a whole bunch of different titles. And I thought, Your Utopia, it makes the most sense to me because there's something kind of like sarcastic about it. It's like, oh, this is your utopia. Or saying that, oh, your utopia is actually a dystopia. So I really like that kind of like double meaning in the title. And there's also a kind of like romance to it, like your utopia, like you want to read a book that is about your utopia and then find out that it's all about your dystopia. The next story is A Song for Sleep. God, there's so much to talk about for this story. This story, when I first read it in the Korean, made me cry. I forget what the Korean title is because when we were translating this story, we kind of like ran into problems that have to do with rights, and we decided to change the song that is used in this story for a song that was out of copyright. And Bora found another song for this story that fit the story even better. And she also translated it from Polish into English. And then I just like edited that translation and then we incorporated it into the story. The song, it's an old Polish song, and it basically, all the metaphors inside it fit. It's about like, oh, you are, the life inside of me. And this elevator contains, its object of affection, which is an old human woman who is, one of the people who live in the building that this elevator is in. And this elevator really takes care of this person and really gives her back her humanity because this woman is living in isolation. She's living alone and she's dying. And really, the only thing in the world that really, really sees her is this elevator, is this smart elevator. And of course, it has a very sad and devastating ending. It's a really, really amazing story. And it is, I believe, available to read in its entirety on Words Without Borders. Next, we have Seed. Now, originally, Seed is the story that ends the whole book. And it has a optimistic ending, I guess. You would have to read it to see what I mean. And that would have been a really great way to end the book with this optimistic question mark ending. But we had to put To Meet Her somewhere. It has the biggest impact when To Meet Her comes at the end. And then we put Bora's afterword, her author's note, like at the end after that, so that we can kind of like sum up the entire book. So Seed is about plant humans. If you think about it, the story isn't like super unusual. It's kind of like, I guess, like Fern Gully or Avatar. Basically, these de facto colonizers come to steal the land and resources, and these indigenous people fight back. Boy, do they fight back. The fun thing that I can tell you about this story is that Bora uses like Russian curse words. Bora was very, very intent on keeping those curse word names, and she like triple checked to see if I put them there. Yes, Bora, I put them there. I believe this story won a big science fiction award here in Korea. I don't really pay attention to them, sorry, so I don't know which one specifically offhand. The last story is, of course, To Meet Her. And this story is based on Staff Sergeant Pyun Hee-soo, who was a trans soldier. The really interesting thing about Pyun Hee-soo's story for me is the fact that she was accepted by her immediate regiment, by her immediate superiors, all the way up to 사단장 level. I'm not sure what that is in English. But it was the people above that that suddenly like made an issue of the fact that this soldier who got along with everyone around them and, who was very, well supported by their immediate regiment. All of a sudden, they had a problem with the fact that a trans soldier was serving, and they discharged her. And a very sad thing happened to her. The book is, in a sense, it is dedicated to her, to Karisu. This book is really dedicated to all of the people that we have failed to give our humanity to, whether they be our trans and non-binary friends and family, whether they be, robots, indigenous people, all of the minorities and all of the disenfranchised people who appear in this work. Not to say that robots are a disenfranchised minority per se, but, metaphorically speaking, they stand in for more than just mechanical bits and pieces in Your Utopia. It was also very important for me to translate the author's note, where Bora talks about how she spent her pandemic years of 2020 and 2021. Basically, she spent it going to protests. To the point where I'd be like, oh my god, I had no idea there were so many protests going on in Seoul, like every week. I also don't understand how Bora managed to write all of these stories and novels that she's publishing now while she went to all of these protests. Anyway, I think her note on the need to protest and like what is the point of the protest? What is the point of protesting? Like what does it change? How does it change us and how does it change the world? I think it's a very, very important note on the need for humans to mourn in order for us to create a better world. And so I'm really, really glad that we managed to put it into the book. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this whistle-stop tour of Your Utopia by Bora Chung, translated by me. And please pick it up in February and beyond. Have a really good one.